Corbin Delaney figured he had seen just about everything the galaxy could throw at a man. 32 years, hauling freight through the merchant corridor, dodging customs inspectors on Bellaric Station, surviving the food poisoning incident at the Gilded Nebula Cantina that locals still called the Great Purge of 47. He thought nothing could genuinely surprise him anymore. He had watched binary stars collapse into each other near the Tesseract Reach, smuggled medical supplies past a consortium blockade during the famine years, and once talked his way out of an impound lot on Columbino Station using nothing but a broken translator and the desperate hope that the security officer found his terrible Valesi accent charming rather than offensive. He was wrong about being unsurprisable, so very spectacularly wrong. The docking clamps released with their familiar hydraulic wheeze as Corbin stepped from the station gangway onto his ship, the borrowed time. His boots, the good ones, the ones he only wore when picking up premium cargo or attending his daughter's school functions, announced his arrival with a tired thunk against the metal deck plates. Every muscle in his body screamed for the cramped bunk waiting down the corridor. 14 hours negotiating a contract with the Mendelssohn Trading Consortium could age a man faster than a decade of hard living. The consortium's chief negotiator, a Trilascan with 17 tentacles and an apparent personal vendetta against the concept of fair market value, had spent most of the session explaining why Corbin's proposed rates were laughably optimistic and representative of a fundamental misunderstanding of galactic commerce. His daughter Penny was staying overnight at Orbital Academy for some kind of science fair project, something about cultivating bioluminescent fungi in zero gravity. The kid was 12 going on 40, smarter than he had ever been, and increasingly suspicious that her father had no idea what he was doing. She was right, of course, but that was beside the point. Corbin had learned to nod convincingly when she explained her experiments, make encouraging sounds at appropriate intervals, and avoid asking questions that would reveal the depths of his scientific ignorance. Last week, she'd tried to explain something about enzyme expression rates, and he'd nodded so enthusiastically that she'd stopped mid-sentence and asked if he was having a neurological episode. The ship should have been silent, dark. The environmental systems running on standby mode to conserve fuel cells, same as always when he was away. The borrowed time was a Hendrix-class freighter, 30 years old, and showing every one of them, held together by replacement parts, creative engineering, and what Corbin privately suspected was sheer stubbornness. She wasn't pretty, but she was paid off, and in the hauling business, that counted for more than aesthetics. Instead of darkness and silence, light spilled from the galley, and someone was humming. Corbin's hand moved to the sidearm, holstered at his hip, not drawing it, just resting there. An old habit from the war years that had never quite faded. 17 years since the boundary conflict had officially ended, but some reflexes didn't care about peace treaties. He moved down the corridor with the careful silence of a man who had learned the hard way that making noise in the wrong situation could get you killed in ways both creative and permanent. The humming continued. A melody he didn't recognize, something with an odd rhythm that didn't quite match any human musical tradition. The galley door stood open. Inside, someone was washing his dishes. Not just someone, her. Yanara Silvestri stood at his tiny sink, her violet skin catching the overhead lights in ways that made her look almost luminous. Her blonde dreadlocks cascaded down her back, swaying gently as she worked, thick rope-like strands that seemed to shimmer with their own internal light. She wore a simple white uniform jacket with subtle silver piping, standard Silvestri Industries executive wear, but without the formal collar pins and rank insignia he'd always seen in the company broadcasts. The jacket was slightly rumpled, as though she'd been wearing it for too long, and there was a small stain near the cuff that looked suspiciously like dish soap. Her brilliant blue eyes were focused on the plate in her hands, scrubbing at something with an intensity that suggested she'd never washed a dish in her entire life and was determined to master the skill through sheer force of will, which Corbin realized with a jolt of absurdity was probably true. Yanara Silvestri was the chief executive director of Silvestri Industries, the largest independent shipping conglomerate in 3 sectors, the woman who signed the paychecks of over 200,000 contractors, himself included. The closest thing the merchant corridor had to royalty, if royalty wore business casual and appeared on financial news broadcasts discussing quarterly projections. And she was scrubbing dried protein paste off his breakfast plate, the same plate he'd been too tired to clean 3 days ago before leaving for the consortium negotiations. The same plate with the chip on the edge, from when Penny had dropped it during a zero-gravity experiment gone wrong. "Mr. Delaney," she said without turning around. Her voice carried that distinctive melodic quality of her species, the Valesi, like someone had figured out how to make vowels shimmer. It was the kind of voice that could make a budget report sound like poetry, or make a simple greeting feel like the opening notes of a symphony. "I apologize for the intrusion. I needed to speak with you, and I thought—" She paused, finally turning to face him. The expression on her face made something cold settle in his stomach, not the cool composure he'd seen in broadcasts, something raw, uncertain, guilty. "I thought this conversation deserved more than a corporate summons." Corbin stood in the doorway, aware that his mouth was hanging open in a way that probably made him look like a landed fish experiencing an existential crisis. He closed it, opened it again, made a sound that wasn't quite a word. "How did you get on my ship?" The question came out strangled, which was fair, because his vocal cords seemed to have forgotten how to function properly. "I have administrative override codes for every vessel under Silvestri contract." She set down the plate, his plate, which was now cleaner than it had been since he'd bought it second-hand from a salvage dealer on Crestfall, and dried her hands on a cloth she'd apparently brought herself. He certainly didn't own anything that clean. "It's a security measure for emergencies. I know that doesn't make this less intrusive, but I needed—" She gestured to his small dining table, a gesture that somehow managed to be both commanding and uncertain. "Please, sit down. What I need to tell you is difficult." "I'd rather stand." The words came out harder than he intended, but something about this whole situation was tripping every alarm bell he had. Every instinct honed by 32 years of navigating the complicated, often treacherous world of independent shipping was screaming that something was very, very wrong. CEOs didn't make house calls. They certainly didn't wash dishes. And they definitely didn't look at contractors like they were about to deliver the worst news of their lives. "And it's Mr. Delaney to you, ma'am. We've never met, far as I recall. You've never so much as acknowledged my existence." "You're right." Her blue eyes, luminescent in the way of her people, like staring into a nebula that had somehow learned to feel emotions, met his directly. There was no flinching, no looking away. Whatever else she was, Yanara Silvestri wasn't a coward. "I've walked past your name on manifests 1,000 times without ever really seeing it. One more line in a spreadsheet. One more number contributing to a total. And that blindness—" She took a breath that seemed to shake something loose inside her, some carefully maintained composure cracking at the edges. "That blindness has allowed terrible things to happen to you, to many people like you, and I'm here because I need you to know what those things are and what I'm going to do about them." Corbin felt his shoulders tense. In his experience, when powerful people started talking about terrible things, the person hearing about them usually ended up worse off than before. That was the way of the galaxy. The powerful gave speeches about justice and accountability, and the regular folks got to clean up the mess afterward. "Ma'am, with respect, you're standing in my galley at 2200 hours talking in riddles. I've been awake for 18 hours, negotiating with a Trelascan who I'm pretty sure was actively trying to give me an aneurysm. Either tell me what this is about, or... 3 days ago, Yanara interrupted, her voice suddenly sharp and clear, cutting through his tired irritation like a blade through fog. I discovered that your operations supervisor, Gavin Kreska, has been systematically defrauding the company, and in the process, destroying the lives of the contractors under his management, including yours. The name hit him like a punch to the sternum. Kreska, the man who assigned his routes, the man who determined his hazard pay, the man who had been promising him for 6 years that his seniority upgrade was in processing and would come through any cycle now. The man Corbin had never trusted, but had never had any real reason to distrust, because what could one contractor do against a supervisor with the full weight of corporate hierarchy behind him? What kind of fraud? His voice came out flat, dangerous, the voice of a man who had suddenly realized that the vague suspicions he'd been pushing down for years might have been more than paranoia. Yanara pulled a data tablet from her jacket pocket. When had executive wear started including pockets? And set it on the table. Numbers scrolled across the display. Columns of figures that meant nothing to him at first glance, but somehow felt heavy with significance. Do you know why you've been running the Helion to Crestfall route exclusively for the past 4 years? Because it's the route I was assigned. Corbin's voice came out flat. Kreska said it was the only one with openings for independent contractors. Said the premium routes were all locked up by the fleet operators, and I'd have to wait my turn. The Helion Crestfall run pays 62 credits per ton-mile. Standard baseline compensation. Barely enough to cover fuel costs and maintenance if you run it at maximum efficiency. Yanara swiped the tablet screen, bringing up another set of numbers. The Columbino's Outer Reach run pays 147 credits per ton-mile, plus hazard bonuses that can double that on rough cycles. The Antares circuit pays 203. The Gemini loop pays 278. She looked up at him, and there was something terrible in her expression. Kreska has been reserving those routes for phantom contractors, fabricated identities he created to collect their wages while forcing real pilots like you onto the lowest-paying assignments available. He's been doing it for almost a decade. The numbers on the screen blurred as Corbin stared at them. He'd always wondered why he could barely make ends meet while other contractors seemed to be doing fine. He'd assumed he was just unlucky, bad at business, not sharp enough to find the good opportunities. His wife, Margot, had always handled the financial planning, and after she died, he'd figured he just didn't have her gift for making numbers work. He'd told himself that some people were meant to struggle, and he was one of them. That's not all. Yanara's voice had gone quiet, almost gentle, like she was delivering news to someone in a hospital room. Your performance ratings, the ones that determine your eligibility for the Owner-Operator Advancement Program, the ones that decided whether you'd ever be able to buy another ship, build a fleet, actually get ahead. I know about those. The bitterness he'd swallowed for years leaked into his words like poison seeping through a cracked container. Consistently below threshold. Trust me, I've seen them every quarter when Kreska sends me my improvement recommendations. I've memorized every criticism, efficiency concerns, navigation inconsistencies, customer communication deficits. I stopped looking at them 2 years ago because they were always the same, and they always made me feel like garbage. Your actual performance metrics are in the top 3% of all contractors in the sector. Yanara pulled up another screen. Delivery accuracy, 99.7%. That's better than most automated courier systems. Fuel efficiency, best in class for your ship type. Customer satisfaction scores that would qualify you for preferred vendor status with every major corporation in the corridor. You have commendations buried in your file from customers who specifically requested you for follow-up contracts." She looked up at him, and her luminescent eyes were bright with something that might have been tears, though he wasn't sure Valesi could cry the way humans did. "Kreska has been falsifying your records for 6 years, Mr. Delaney, keeping you trapped in the lowest tier while he collected bonuses for managing underperforming contractors. You were his best pilot, and he made you believe you were worthless." Corbin gripped the edge of the doorframe. The metal creaked under his fingers, protesting the sudden pressure. 6 years. 6 years of taking every extra shift, running routes back to back until he could barely see straight, telling himself that if he just worked a little harder, things would turn around, of eating synthetic protein 3 meals a day because real food was too expensive, of telling Penny they couldn't afford the field trip to the astronomical observatory, or the new learning tablet everyone else in her class had, or the summer camp on Europa Station that she'd been dreaming about since she was 8, of watching her pretend it didn't hurt when he said no again, watching her smile and say it was okay. "Dad, we can do it next year," even though they both knew next year would be the same. 6 years of believing he just wasn't good enough. Why? The words scraped out of his throat like broken glass. Why would he do this? Because you're good at your job. Yanara's voice carried a weight of exhausted understanding, the sound of someone who had spent 3 days asking the same question and finding the same terrible answer. Too good. If your real performance had been visible, you would have been promoted years ago. You'd have your own fleet by now, probably. Contracts with major shipping lines, a seat at the table when route allocations were being decided. And Kreska would have lost his most reliable workhorse, someone skilled enough to carry an impossible workload without complaining because he thought— Her voice cracked just slightly. Because he thought he didn't deserve better. Corbin's legs gave out. He sank into the chair across from her, his hands trembling against the tabletop. The galaxy felt like it was tilting sideways, everything he'd believed about himself sliding away into a void of new and terrible understanding. "How long have you known?" The question came out raw, accusatory, because part of him, the part that had learned not to trust powerful people, needed to know if she'd been complicit, if this confession was just damage control. "How long have you been sitting in your corner office, watching people like me get destroyed?" 3 days? The answer was immediate, unflinching. "I was reviewing budget anomalies. Something didn't add up in the sector allocations. Numbers that should have been distributed evenly were clustering in strange ways. When I started digging, I found the phantom contractors. I found Kreska's personal accounts swelling with unexplained deposits. I found 17 years of falsified records." She leaned forward, and there was something fierce in her expression now. "Yesterday morning, I confronted him. He laughed at me, said I'd never be able to prove anything without destroying the company's reputation in the process. Said the board would never let me pursue it because the scandal would tank our stock price. What happened? I brought in an independent forensic accounting team, off the books, paid out of my personal accounts, so the board couldn't block it. By yesterday evening, I had everything: communications records, financial trails, falsified documentation going back almost a decade, 17 phantom contractors, over 2 million credits stolen, and 43 real contractors whose lives he destroyed to make it happen." Her jaw tightened. "He's been arrested. Station security took him into custody this morning. But Mr. Delaney, it's not just him." She stood, moving to the small porthole that looked out at the stars. Her reflection in the glass looked tired, haunted. "I've spent the last 72 hours discovering that this kind of exploitation has been happening throughout my company. Supervisors skimming hazard pay, falsifying equipment maintenance to pocket the difference, deliberately sabotaging advancement opportunities for contractors who might threaten their positions. It's not everywhere, and it's not everyone, but it's enough. She turned back to face him. Enough to make me realize that I built a system where predators could exploit good people while I sat in my office watching profit margins and telling myself everything was fine. Corbin stared at her. In all the years he'd worked for Solvestri Industries, well, for the local sector operations of Solvestri Industries, since the actual company was so vast that most contractors never thought about the person at the top, he'd never seen Yanara Solvestri as anything but untouchable, cold, powerful, a face on screens and quarterly reports, as remote and unreachable as the distant stars. But sitting across from him now, with dark circles under her luminescent eyes and guilt written across her violet features, she looked devastatingly human, or whatever the Valesi equivalent of human was. "So why are you here?" His voice came out rough. "Why come to my ship? Why wash my dishes, for crying out loud? You could have sent a message, a lawyer, an accountant with a settlement offer, and a non-disclosure agreement. Because when I read your file..." Yanara stopped, composing herself with visible effort. Her hands, he noticed, were shaking slightly. The hands that signed contracts worth more than he'd earn in 10 lifetimes, trembling like a child's. "You have a daughter, 12 years old. A brilliant girl who barely sees her father because he's working himself to exhaustion, trying to provide for her. And your wife..." "She died." Corbin's voice was flat. A wall slamming down. 4 years ago, cascade failure on the Persephone crossing. They said the safety systems on the transport should have caught it, but something malfunctioned. Wrong place, wrong time. Just bad luck, they said. The transport was operating under a Solvestri maintenance contract. Yanara's words fell like stones into still water. "I checked. The safety systems had been flagged for replacement 8 months before the accident. The supervisor responsible for that sector had been deferring the expense to inflate his quarterly bonuses. The same pattern, the same corruption, different victims." The silence that followed was absolute. Corbin couldn't breathe, couldn't think, couldn't process what she was telling him. For 4 years, he'd accepted Margot's death as random tragedy. The cruel mathematics of the universe, bad luck, nothing anyone could have prevented. And now this woman, this stranger who signed his paychecks, was telling him that his wife had died because someone wanted a bigger bonus. He opened his mouth, closed it, opened it again. The words that came out surprised him. The supervisor, the one who deferred the maintenance. What happened to him? He retired 3 years ago with a full pension and a commendation for cost management. Yanara's voice was bitter. He's living on a colony in the Outer Reach, beach property. I have his address. She paused. I have a lot of addresses now. I am not asking for your forgiveness. Yanara stepped closer, and her luminescent eyes held his with an intensity that made it impossible to look away. I'm not even asking you to understand. There is no corporate procedure, no legal settlement, no amount of money that could address what's been done to you. I sat in my office 2 nights ago, reading your file, seeing everything, the stolen wages, the ruined career, your wife's death, and I realized that every institutional response would be an insult, a check and a form letter, sympathy drafted by a public relations team. She gestured at the clean dishes drying in the rack, the swept floor, the organized counter. I know this is absurd. I know showing up to wash your dishes is probably the strangest thing anyone has ever done to you. But I needed you to see that I'm willing to stand here in your home and face what my company has done, not hiding behind lawyers or accountants or corporate speak. Just me, seeing you, finally, actually seeing you. Corbin looked at her, really looked. Yanara Solvestri, CEO of an interstellar empire, standing in his cramped galley with dish soap on her sleeve and guilt in her eyes. She looked about as far from untouchable as anyone he'd ever seen. She looked like someone who had discovered something terrible and had no idea how to make it right, but was determined to try anyway. "What happens now?" His voice sounded strange to his own ears, hollow, like it was coming from somewhere far away. "Now." She straightened, and he caught a glimpse of the executive underneath the exhausted woman, the spine of someone who had built an empire and wasn't going to let it crumble without a fight. "Now I rebuild everything. Independent oversight committees with real authority. Direct contractor councils that can override management decisions. Anonymous reporting systems that actually lead to investigations instead of disappearing into bureaucratic void. And for you, specifically," she pulled out another data chip, "back pay for 6 years of wage theft. Immediate promotion to senior independent operator status with full equity stake. First right of refusal on premium routes. Access to the fleet maintenance program at cost." She slid the chip across the table. "It won't give you back the years, won't bring back your wife, won't restore all the time you should have had with your daughter instead of working yourself to death for people who didn't deserve your effort. But it's what I can do. It's where I have to start." Just like that, Corbin heard himself laugh. A broken sound. "You wave your hand and suddenly I'm senior operator. You've been doing senior operator work for 6 years without the compensation. I'm not doing you a favor. I'm correcting an injustice." Yanara met his eyes. "But there's something else I need. And here it comes." He leaned back, the familiar cynicism sliding into place like armor. After 32 years in this business, he knew how deals worked. Nothing was ever free. "What's the catch?" "I need your help." The words seemed to cost her something. Pride, maybe. The admission of weakness from someone who had spent 40 years projecting strength. "You know this system from the inside. You know where the problems are because you've lived them. I'm trying to rebuild my company into something that actually serves the people who work for it. And I can't do that from an executive office on a station where the closest I come to real operations is reading quarterly reports. You want me to be some kind of consultant? I want you to be my conscience." Her blue eyes blazed with intensity. "Someone who will tell me when I'm getting it wrong, who isn't afraid to point out that the numbers don't mean anything if the people behind them are suffering. Who can walk into a room full of executives and say, 'This policy is garbage,' without worrying about political consequences?" She smiled, though it didn't quite reach her eyes. "I'm told you have strong opinions about things. Your file includes 17 formal complaints about inefficient route scheduling. 18, they apparently lost one. 18 complaints. Each one technically correct, I've been informed, though the routing committee described your communication style as abrasive and unnecessarily colorful." Yanara's smile turned slightly more genuine. "That's exactly what I need. Someone who cares enough to be abrasive." Before Corbin could respond, the ship's airlock cycled with a familiar clunk. "Dad?" Penny's voice echoed down the corridor, followed by the rapid patter of running footsteps. "Dad? I finished the experiment early, and the Academy shuttle was already leaving. So I caught a ride with Mr. Tanaka from the maintenance bay, and she appeared in the galley doorway and stopped dead. 12 years old, dark hair perpetually escaping its ponytail, wearing the slightly too big Academy jumpsuit she refused to grow out of because she claimed it was perfectly comfortable, Dad. Stop trying to make me care about fashion." Her eyes, brown like her mother's had been, went wide as she registered the alien woman standing in their kitchen. Penny looked between Corbin and Yanara, with the deeply suspicious expression only a preteen could truly master. The expression that said she was cataloging every detail for later analysis and possible leverage. "Who's this?" Corbin's mind went blank. "How did you explain any of this to a kid? Hey, sweetheart, This is the CEO of the company that's been exploiting your father for 6 years and also might be responsible for your mother's death, but she's trying to make up for it by washing our dishes. This is Director Silvestri. He found his voice. She owns the company I work for. Penny's eyes narrowed further. The suspicious squint of a natural scientist confronted with an unexpected variable. The lady on the news broadcasts? The one who owns like 50,000 ships? 237,000, actually. Yanara's voice had shifted. Gentler now. Warmer. The voice of someone who actually enjoyed talking to children, even if she probably didn't get many opportunities. But who's counting? You must be Penny, I've heard. Well, I've read quite a lot about you. You read about me. Penny's suspicious squint wavered slightly, curiosity fighting with distrust. I learned about you 3 days ago, and I've been very impressed by what I've found. Yanara smiled, a real smile, warm and self-deprecating. Top of your class in applied stellar navigation, second in the junior engineering program, and your science fair project on bioluminescent fungi is apparently generating serious interest from the Botanical Research Institute. They mentioned something about enzyme expression rates in variable gravity conditions. Penny's jaw dropped. You know about my science project? I read the abstract in your academy file. Yanara knelt down slightly, bringing herself closer to Penny's eye level. What made you think to culture the fungi in variable gravity conditions? Most researchers only test 0G versus standard gravity. And just like that, Penny launched into an explanation that Corbin could barely follow. Something about cellular luminescence thresholds and how spinning the culture at different rotation speeds produced wildly different results, and how she'd accidentally discovered that the brightest specimens came from the cultures that experienced the most variation. Yanara listened with genuine attention, asking questions that made Penny light up in a way Corbin hadn't seen in months, maybe years. He watched them talk, this unlikely pair, his brilliant daughter and the CEO of an interstellar corporation, and felt something shift in his chest, something that might have been the first fragile stirring of hope in a very long time. Eventually, Penny's energy flagged. Her explanation trailed off into a yawn she failed to suppress. All right, young scientist. Corbin pushed himself up from the table. Time for bed. But, Dad, no arguments. You've got another academy day tomorrow. Penny looked at Yenera with an expression that was half pleading, half calculating, the expression of a child who had spotted a potential ally against parental authority. Will you be here when I wake up? Yenara glanced at Corbin, uncertainty flickering across her features. That's up to your father. I hope so, Penny said seriously. You're the first person who actually wanted to hear about my project. Dad tries, but he gets this look on his face like his brain is melting. Thanks, kid. Corbin ruffled her hair. Love you too. After a protracted bedtime negotiation involving 2 glasses of water, 1 bathroom trip, a detailed explanation of why she couldn't bring her fungus cultures into her room overnight, and a promise to send Penny the specifications for Silvestri Industries' research vessel program, Corbin returned to the galley. Yanara was standing at the porthole, staring out at the star field. The light from distant suns caught her violet skin, making her look almost ghostly. She's extraordinary, she said quietly without turning around. You've done an amazing job with her. Most days I feel like I'm making it up as I go along. Corbin leaned against the counter. Her mother was the one who knew how to do this stuff. The science projects, the emotional conversations, the figuring out what a kid actually needs versus what they say they want. I just try not to break anything. That's called being a parent. Yanara turned from the window. Or so I'm told. No kids of your own? No family at all, really? She said it matter-of-factly, but something in her posture suggested it was anything but. I'm 46 years old, which is about 35 by human standards, before you ask about Valesi aging, And I can't remember the last time I sat down with someone who wasn't trying to sell me something or get something from me." She laughed softly. "Your daughter asked me about my favorite color. Do you know how long it's been since anyone cared about something that simple? What did you tell her?" "Amber." Yanara's mouth quirked. "Like sunset on the autumn worlds. She told me that was acceptable but basic, and that I should consider branching out into the teal family." Corbin couldn't help it. He laughed. A real laugh, not the bitter thing that had escaped him earlier. "That sounds like her." "She also said—" Yanara hesitated. "She said you don't smile much anymore. That you used to tell jokes all the time, terrible puns that made her groan, but now you're always tired." The words landed like a physical weight. Corbin looked away, suddenly very interested in a scratch on the counter. He'd known on some level, known that he'd become a shadow of himself. But hearing it from his daughter's mouth, relayed by a stranger, made it real in a way he hadn't been ready for. "The job you're offering," he said quietly, changing the subject because he couldn't face the alternative. "This conscience thing, is it real, or is this just some kind of liability management? Get the exploited contractor on the payroll so he can't sue." "It's real. I've already drafted the position, but Corbin—" She used his first name. And somehow that felt like crossing a threshold, like they had moved from whatever this had been into something else entirely. "I won't pressure you. If you want nothing to do with me or Silvestri after tonight, I'll understand. I'll still make the changes. You'll still receive everything you're owed. The choice is yours." He thought about Penny's words. Dad doesn't smile much anymore. He thought about 6 years of believing he wasn't good enough, of his wife's death being something more than random tragedy, being preventable if only someone had cared enough to do their job properly. And he thought about the woman standing in his galley who could have sent an army of lawyers, but instead showed up to wash his dishes and face him like a person. "I'll think about it," he said finally. It's a lot to process." "Of course." Yanara moved toward the airlock, then paused. "Corbin, for what it's worth, sitting with your daughter tonight, talking about fungi and colors and nothing important at all." Her voice wavered. I didn't realize how much I'd been missing until I saw it through her eyes. After she left, Corbin stood in his quiet galley, staring at the clean dishes in the drying rack. Somewhere during the conversation, Yanara had folded a napkin into the shape of a flower. Probably some Valesi custom, something her own family had done when she was young. Penny would love it. For the first time in years, he felt something he'd almost forgotten. Not quite hope. He wasn't ready for that yet. But maybe the possibility of hope. A door cracked open after so long in the dark. And then, because he was 47 years old, and his body hadn't forgotten what exhaustion felt like even if his mind was spinning, he sat down at his kitchen table and cried. For Margot, for the years he'd lost, for the man he'd let himself become, for everything, the tears the title promised, finally arriving, not from shock, not from grief, from the terrible, complicated relief of finally understanding that the weight he'd been carrying wasn't his failure at all. 3 weeks later, Corbin walked through the executive level of Bellaric Station with a visitor badge clipped to his jacket that read, Strategic Contractor Liaison. The title still felt ridiculous, like someone had grabbed random words out of a corporate dictionary and smashed them together. But it came with an office. He had an office now, which was its own kind of absurd, that overlooked the main shipping bay through a floor-to-ceiling window that made him vaguely dizzy if he stared too long. The changes had started immediately after that night. Kreska was facing criminal charges that would keep him in a rehabilitation facility for the foreseeable future. The forensic accounting team had identified 14 other supervisors engaged in similar schemes across different sectors, and each one had been dealt with according to the severity of their crimes. Yanara had been ruthless in addressing each case, but more importantly, she'd been methodical, building systems to prevent it from happening again instead of just punishing the individuals responsible. And she'd meant what she said about wanting his input. In the past 3 weeks, he'd sat in on more meetings than he'd attended in his entire previous career, watching Yanara navigate the treacherous waters of corporate politics while actually listening when he pointed out that a proposed contractor wellness program was missing the point entirely. "They don't need counseling services," he told her bluntly, interrupting a presentation from a very expensive consulting firm. "They need to know that when they report a safety issue, someone will actually fix it. They need to stop being afraid that speaking up will get them blacklisted." The consultants had looked offended. Yanara had scrapped their proposal and implemented his suggestion that same afternoon. His communicator buzzed. A message from Yanara: "Meeting room 7 when you have a moment. Bring coffee if you can manage it." He found her standing by the observation window, her violet skin catching the light from the stars beyond. She looked better than she had that first night. The exhaustion had faded, replaced by something that might have been determination, or maybe just peace. "I come bearing gifts." He held up 2 cups from the executive break room. The coffee there was actually decent, which was another thing he was still adjusting to. "You wanted to see me. I have news." She turned, and he caught a flash of something complicated in her luminescent eyes. The board accepted the restructuring proposal. All of it. Independent contractor councils, real equity participation, the anonymous reporting system with teeth. It's going to cost us about 3% of annual profits. Let me guess, they're thrilled. 2 of them threatened to resign. Yanara's mouth curved into a smile that was almost mischievous. "I told them I'd accept their resignations immediately and replace them with contractors who actually understood how shipping operations work." Corbin couldn't help the laugh that escaped him. 3 weeks ago, he never would have believed he'd be standing here, sharing jokes with the most powerful woman in the sector. "You didn't actually say that." "I absolutely did." She moved closer, and he became aware of the subtle shimmer of her skin, the way her dreadlocks shifted like living things. They didn't resign, for the record. Apparently, the prospect of losing their positions was more concerning than losing 3% of profits. Funny how that works. The silence that followed was different from their usual professional pauses, charged with something unspoken. "Corbin." Yanara's voice was softer now. "I need to tell you something, and I need you to understand that it has nothing to do with the job or the company or any of that." He raised an eyebrow. "Should I be worried?" "Probably." She took a breath. "I've been thinking about you, constantly, and not as my strategic liaison or my conscience or any of those professional labels, as the man who welcomed me into his home when he had every reason to throw me out, as the father who's raising an extraordinary daughter under impossible circumstances, as someone who makes me laugh in meetings and calls out terrible ideas without worrying about consequences." She stopped, her luminescent eyes meeting his. "As someone, I find myself wanting to know better, much better." The words hung in the air between them. "You know there are about 17 regulations against this," Corbin said, but his voice came out rough instead of dismissive. "Fraternization policies, power dynamics, conflict of interest. I wrote most of those policies. I can also revise them." A hint of challenge crept into her tone. "Or are you looking for an excuse to say no?" He thought about it, really thought. About the years of loneliness since Margot died, about the way he'd built walls around himself to keep from getting hurt again, about Penny's comment that he didn't smile anymore. "I'm terrified," he admitted. "I don't know how to do this. It's been so long since I let anyone in that I've forgotten how." "That makes 2 of us." Yanara reached out, her violet fingers brushing against his hand. The touch sent an unexpected warmth through him. I've spent my entire adult life building a company. I don't know how to build anything else, but I'd like to try if you're willing. Penny adores you, he said. She asks about you constantly. When is Director Silvestri coming back? Will Director Silvestri want to see my new project? Does Director Silvestri like Antarian chocolate? I do like Antarian chocolate, Yanara said, and there was a smile in her voice now. Very much. Then come to dinner tomorrow night. The words were out before he could second-guess them. Nothing fancy, just me and Penny and whatever I can manage to cook without setting off the fire suppression systems. That happens often. Define often. She laughed, a real, genuine laugh that made her whole face light up. Tomorrow night, I'll be there. He burned the protein patties. Of course he did. Penny had helped prepare the galley, which meant her collection of geological samples was now organized in what she called aesthetically appropriate clusters across the counter. She'd also insisted on creating place cards with everyone's name in elaborate calligraphy, complete with tiny drawings of spaceships and mushrooms. When the airlock cycled at 1800 hours exactly, Penny was at the door before Corbin could even put down his spatula. You came! She launched herself at Yanara with the enthusiastic abandon of a child who had decided this particular alien executive was worthy of her affection. Yanara caught her with an oof of surprise, but her arms wrapped around Penny with obvious warmth. I wouldn't miss it. Dad's burning dinner, Penny reported cheerfully. But I made dessert. It's supposed to be stellar pudding, but it looks kind of like engine grease. Engine grease can be delicious, Yanara said seriously. I once survived 3 days on recycled lubricant during a supply crisis. Character-building experience. Penny's eyes went wide. Really? No, it was awful. But we tell ourselves these things to feel better about our poor life choices. Dinner was chaos in the best possible way. The protein patties were indeed burned. The synthetic vegetables had achieved a texture that defied classification. And Penny's stellar pudding did look remarkably like engine grease, though it tasted significantly better. But Yanara laughed when Penny explained her theory that dust bunnies were actually a form of primitive fungal life, adapting to spaceship environments. She asked follow-up questions about spore distribution patterns and seemed genuinely interested in the answer. And when Corbin accidentally knocked over his drink reaching for the salt, she caught it with reflexes that made him wonder exactly what kind of training Valesi executives underwent. After dinner, Penny insisted on showing Yanara her latest science project, an attempt to grow crystals in the low-gravity corner of the cargo bay. Corbin watched from the doorway as Yanara knelt beside his daughter, examining the formation with genuine interest, while Penny explained her methodology in increasingly technical terms. The cubic structures form faster when there's minimal vibration, Penny said, pointing at a cluster of pale blue crystals. But the hexagonal ones are more stable. I'm trying to figure out if there's a way to get both properties in the same formation. Have you considered temperature variation? Yanara asked. When I was young, very young before I started the company, I spent a summer working in a mining operation on Tessari Prime. The best crystal formations we found were in caves, where the temperature cycled naturally between hot and cold. Penny's face lit up like a small sun. You worked in mines. I've worked everywhere, Yanara smiled. Before I built Silvestri Industries, I was a cargo handler, a shuttle pilot, a customs inspector, briefly and not very successfully, and once, memorably, a professional taste tester for a synthetic food company. What happened with that one? I told them their flagship product tasted like cardboard, soaked in disappointment. They disagreed with my assessment. Yanara's mouth quirked. I was asked to pursue other opportunities. Penny giggled, a bright sound that Corbin realized he hadn't heard nearly enough of lately. Later, after Penny had been persuaded to go to bed with only minimal negotiation, Corbin and Yanara sat in the small observation alcove at the front of the ship. Stars wheeled slowly past the viewport as the station completed its rotation. "She asked me something tonight," Yanara said quietly. "While you were cleaning up. Should I be worried?" "She asked if I was going to be around for a while. Not in a suspicious way. She's clearly gotten past that phase. More." Yanara paused. Hopeful, like she was afraid to want something but couldn't help wanting it anyway. Corbin's chest tightened. "What did you tell her?" "I told her I wanted to be. If that was okay with her and her father." Yanara turned to face him, and her luminescent eyes were bright with something that might have been tears. She still didn't know if Valesi could cry the way humans did, but whatever this was, it was close. "Corbin, I've spent 40 years building something I thought was important. Profit margins and market share and quarterly reports. And 3 weeks ago, I sat in my office looking at your file and realized that none of it meant anything if the people building it were suffering." "Yanara, let me finish." She reached out, her violet fingers intertwining with his. "Tonight, watching Penny explain crystals like they were the most important thing in the universe, I felt something I haven't felt in decades, maybe ever. Like I was exactly where I was supposed to be." He looked at their joined hands, his weathered and calloused from years of hard work, hers elegant and shimmering, and thought about all the walls he'd built. All the reasons he'd told himself to stay alone, stay safe, stay closed off from anything that might hurt him again. "I'm probably going to mess this up," he said finally. "I'm going to work too much, forget to communicate, push you away when I get scared. And I'm going to be distracted by corporate crises at inconvenient moments, struggle to understand human customs, and occasionally say things that are wildly inappropriate, because Valesi directness doesn't always translate well." Her grip on his hand tightened. "But I'd like to try anyway, if you're willing." "Yeah." His voice came out rough. "Yeah, I'm willing." She leaned in and kissed him, soft and tentative, and carrying the taste of stellar pudding and something uniquely her own. When they pulled apart, she rested her forehead against his. "I should warn you," she murmured. "Penny already asked if I know how to braid hair. Apparently, her technique could use improvement, and she's decided I'm the solution." "Do you know how to braid hair?" "Absolutely not, but I'm an excellent researcher." From down the corridor came Penny's not at all sleepy voice. "Are you guys being mushy? I can hear you being mushy." They broke apart, laughing. "Go to sleep, young scientist," Corbin called back. "Okay, but Yanara..." "Yes, Penny?" A pause, then smaller. "I'm glad you're here." Yanara's eyes glistened. "I'm glad I'm here too, little one." In the months that followed, Yanara became a fixture in their lives. Sunday morning breakfast runs to the station's market district, where she discovered a passion for human pastries that Penny found endlessly amusing. Academy events, where Yanara sat in the front row, asking questions that made the teachers nervous and made Penny beam with pride. Late-night conversations after Penny was asleep, slowly learning the shape of each other's histories and hopes and fears. It wasn't always smooth. There were arguments about work-life balance, moments when Yanara's instinct to control everything clashed with Corbin's fierce independence. Once, memorably, a disagreement about the proper way to organize a cargo manifest that somehow escalated into a 3-hour discussion about fundamental differences in Valesi and human approaches to logical categorization. They'd both stormed off to opposite ends of the ship, then met back in the galley 20 minutes later with apologies and the shared realization that maybe cargo manifests weren't worth damaging a relationship over. But they worked through it, learning each other, building something real. 6 months after that first night, Corbin came home from a meeting to find Yanara and Penny in the galley, covered in flour and laughing at something on Penny's tablet. "We're making Valesi's celebration bread," Penny announced. gesturing at the chaotic workspace with flower-covered hands. Yanara says her grandmother used to make it for special occasions. What's the occasion? Penny and Yanara exchanged a look that Corbin couldn't quite interpret, the kind of conspiratorial glance that suggested planning had been happening behind his back. I got a message today, Yanara said carefully. The Botanical Research Institute officially accepted Penny's proposal. They want to fund a full study of her bioluminescent fungi research. 3-year grant, access to their zero-gravity facilities, the works. What? Corbin looked at his daughter, who was practically vibrating with suppressed excitement. Penny, that's incredible. I know. She bounced on her heels, flour puffing off her jumpsuit. And they want me to present at the Junior Scientists Conference next month. Yanara helped me with the application. She didn't tell me she submitted it because she said she didn't want me to be disappointed if it didn't work out. But it worked out. Corbin looked at Yanara, who was trying very hard to look casual, despite the flower on her nose and the obvious pride in her expression. You did this? I made some introductions. The work is all Penny's. Yanara's smile was soft. She deserves to have people see what she's capable of. After dinner, Valesi's celebration bread was surprisingly delicious. Though Penny insisted on adding chocolate chips that were probably not traditional, Corbin found Yanara on the observation deck watching the stars. Thank you, he said, for everything you've done for her. For us. I haven't done anything special. Yanara turned to face him. Just tried to see her. Really see her, the way I should have seen all the people in my company all along. You've done more than that. Corbin moved closer, taking her hands in his. You've shown her, shown both of us, that people can change, that someone can recognize they've been part of a broken system and choose to fix it instead of pretending it doesn't exist. I'm still fixing it. Her voice was quiet. Every day, I find something else that needs to change. Sometimes I wonder if I'll ever actually get it right. Maybe that's the point. He lifted her hands to his lips, pressing a kiss to her knuckles. Maybe getting it right isn't about reaching some perfect endpoint. Maybe it's about keeping at it, staying aware, not giving up. Yanara was quiet for a moment. When she spoke again, her voice was thick with emotion. Penny asked me something today, while we were making bread. She's full of questions. She asked if I was going to be her family. Yanara's luminescent eyes met his. Not new mom or stepmother or any of those human terms, just family, part of what you two have built together. Corbin's heart clenched. What did you tell her? I told her I already was. A tear slipped down Yanara's violet cheek, leaving a shimmering trail. If she and her father would have me, we would. The words came out rough with emotion. We do. She kissed him then, deep and sure, and he tasted salt and stardust and something that felt like coming home. When they finally pulled apart, Penny's voice drifted through the ship's intercom. I'm definitely not spying through the security cameras, but you should know I recorded that and I'm keeping it forever, Corbin groaned. Penny, it's for science. Future historians will want documentation of cross-species relationship rituals. Yanara was laughing so hard, she had to lean against him for support. I think, she managed between gasps, that our daughter may have inherited your tendency toward creative interpretation of privacy protocols. Our daughter. The words settled into his chest like a key fitting a lock, like something that had always been waiting to be said. Yeah, he said softly. I think she did. Later that night, after Penny had finally gone to bed, and the ship had settled into its quiet nighttime hum, Corbin stood at the porthole in his quarters and watched the stars wheel past. Yanara was asleep in the bunk behind him. She'd started staying over on weekends, their schedules gradually intertwining in ways that felt natural instead of forced. He thought about the man he'd been 6 months ago, exhausted, bitter, convinced that the universe had decided he would always struggle, always fall short, always be invisible to the people who mattered. He'd stopped hoping for anything more than survival. And then a violet-skinned woman had broken into his ship to wash his dishes and tell him the truth about his life. Sometimes the galaxy surprised you. Sometimes the person you least expected showed up in your kitchen and changed everything. Sometimes hope arrived wearing executive casual and smelling like dish soap, carrying the weight of guilt and the determination to make things right. "You're thinking too loudly," Yanara murmured from the bunk. "Come to bed." "How can you tell I'm thinking?" "I can feel it. Valesi sensitivity to emotional resonance, remember? You're projecting contentment mixed with philosophical reflection." A pause. "It's very loud." He laughed, turning from the window. "I was just thinking about how weird life is. Weird good or weird bad. Weird good." He slid into the bunk beside her, feeling her warmth against his side. "Definitely weird good." She made a satisfied sound and tucked herself against him. "Good. Now stop thinking and go to sleep. Your daughter has informed me that we're making pancakes shaped like nebulae tomorrow morning, and apparently this requires significant preparation." Nebula pancakes. She has diagrams, very detailed diagrams. I believe color coding is involved. Of course she does. Corbin closed his eyes, breathing in the moment. His daughter asleep down the hall, dreaming of fungi and crystals and the mysteries of the universe. The woman he loved beside him, building a future neither of them had expected. A ship that had been a prison of loneliness transformed into something that finally felt like home. Not perfect, never perfect, but real. And that was more than enough. The stars wheeled on outside, indifferent to the small miracles happening aboard the borrowed time. But Corbin Delaney, veteran hauler, reluctant corporate liaison, and surprisingly optimistic single father, smiled in his sleep for the first time in years. Tomorrow there would be nebula pancakes, and that was a pretty good place to start. The end.